If you grew up anywhere near a Sunday school, a synagogue, or even just absorbed the cultural osmosis of Western literature, you likely have a very specific image burned into your brain when you hear the name Jonah. I know I do. When I close my eyes and think back to those bright Sunday mornings of my childhood, I don't see a complex geopolitical thriller. I see a flannel graph board. I see a little cartoon man with a bewildered expression sitting cross-legged inside the cavernous, remarkably well-lit belly of a giant, smiling whale. In these childhood renditions, the whale was the undisputed star of the show. It was a story of a magical marine rescue, a bizarre maritime adventure that ended with a man being comically spat out onto a beach, ready to do the right thing. For years, that was the entirety of the narrative for me. It was a story about listening to instructions, wrapped in an aquatic fairy tale. But as I grew older and revisited the ancient text, a startling, almost comical realization washed over me. The fish is barely in the story. In a narrative spanning 4 chapters, the great sea creature commands exactly 3 verses. It has no dialogue, no motivation, and no grand theological exposition. It is, for all intents and purposes, an ancient maritime Uber. It is a plot device, a biological submarine dispatched simply to transport our runaway protagonist from point A to point B when his original travel plans literally went underwater. Yet, this biological anomaly has entirely hijacked the legacy of the story. We have spent millennia arguing over the anatomical feasibility of a human surviving in gastric acid, debating the differences between a whale and a great fish, and trying to rationalize the physics of the miracle. And in doing so, we have completely missed the point. We have allowed a 3-verse cameo to distract us from one of the darkest, most psychologically complex, and profoundly uncomfortable pieces of literature to survive the ancient world. When you strip away the cartoon whale and the childhood nostalgia, what remains is not a children's fable. It is a story about the terrifying, scandalous nature of divine grace. It is a story about a man who knew exactly who God was and absolutely hated him for it. It is a narrative that forces us to look in the mirror and ask ourselves the most difficult questions about justice, mercy, and the limits of our own conditional empathy. So I invite you to leave the fish behind. Let it swim back into the depths of the Sunday school flannel graphs. We are going to look at the man, the city, and the storm, because the story of Jonah was never, ever about the fish. To understand the sheer magnitude of Jonah's rebellion, we have to stop and look at the map of the ancient Near East, and more importantly, we have to understand the shadow that hung over it. The text tells us simply that God commanded Jonah to go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it. To a modern reader, Nineveh is just a dusty, archaeological footprint in modern-day Iraq. It sounds like any other ancient city, Babylon, Ur, Jericho. But to an ancient Israelite, the very word Nineveh would evoke a visceral, chilling reaction. It would be akin to saying the name of a notorious concentration camp to a survivor of the Holocaust, or mentioning a ruthless cartel to a family whose lives they have destroyed. Nineveh was the capital of the Assyrian Empire, and the Assyrians were the undisputed terror of the ancient world. They did not just conquer, they annihilated. They were pioneers in the art of psychological warfare and state-sponsored terrorism. Their own kings boasted in stone reliefs, which we can still see in museums today, about their atrocities. They proudly depicted themselves flaying their enemies alive, impaling civilian populations on spikes outside the city gates, cutting off the hands, lips, and noses of captives, and stacking the skulls of the defeated into massive, horrifying pyramids as a warning to anyone who dared to defy the empire. They were a cogs and gears war machine fueled by blood and dominance. And this machine had frequently turned its devastating gaze toward Jonah's homeland. The Assyrians had terrorized the Israelites, demanded crushing tribute, and would eventually go on to completely obliterate the northern kingdom, wiping 10 tribes of Israel off the map of history. They were not just sinners in some abstract, moralistic sense. They were the monsters under the bed. They were the oppressors, the murderers of Jonah's countrymen, the architects of his people's trauma. So, when the call comes to Jonah, "Go to Nineveh and preach to them," we immediately assume, based on typical human psychology, that Jonah ran away because he was afraid. Who wouldn't be? Walking into the capital of the most bloodthirsty empire on earth and telling them that their doom is imminent sounds like a remarkably efficient way to get yourself flayed alive. It makes perfect sense that Jonah would pack his bags and flee out of self-preservation. But as I read deeper into the text, I realized that fear is not what drove Jonah to the seaport of Joppa. Jonah wasn't afraid that the Ninevites would kill him. He was terrified that God would save them. This is the brilliant, twisted irony of the prophet's mind. Jonah is a theologian. He knows the character of his God perfectly well. He knows that if God is sending a prophet to give a 40-day warning, it means God is leaving a window open for repentance. A God who just wants to destroy doesn't send a warning, he sends fire. The very act of sending Jonah is an act of mercy, and Jonah finds this absolutely repulsive. Put yourself in his sandals. Imagine being asked to offer a path to salvation to the very people who slaughtered your family. Imagine being told to extend grace to the architects of genocide. Jonah's refusal is not an act of cowardice. It is an act of deeply entrenched, nationalistic defiance. He is a patriot who loves his country and hates its enemies. He believes in justice. He wants the Assyrians to burn. He wants the sky to open up and rain down hellfire on Nineveh, and he refuses to be the instrument of their deliverance. So he runs. He heads to the port, pays the fare, and boards a ship heading to Tarshish. Geographically, Nineveh is far to the east, a grueling overland journey. Tarshish, believed by many scholars to be somewhere on the coast of ancient Spain, was the furthest known point to the west. It was the edge of the map. Jonah is not just declining an assignment. He is trying to put the entire known world between himself and the scandalous, offensive mercy of God. He is choosing his own vision of retributive justice over his divine calling. And as I reflect on this, I have to admit how uncomfortably relatable Jonah is. We all have our Ninevehs. We all have people, groups, or ideologies that we secretly believe are beyond the pale of redemption, people we think deserve the absolute worst. Jonah's flight is the physical manifestation of our own internal refusal to forgive. The narrative of Jonah's flight is a masterpiece of literary descent. In the original Hebrew text, the language paints a picture of a man moving steadily downward, both physically and spiritually. He goes down to Joppa. He goes down into the ship. And as the storm begins to rage, he goes down into the innermost parts of the vessel to fall into a deep, death-like sleep. It is the sleep of depression, of apathy, of a man who has decided that if he cannot have the world on his own terms, he would rather not be conscious in it at all. He is actively trying to unexist. But the universe, it seems, refuses to let him quietly slip away. The text tells us that God hurled a great wind upon the sea. The storm is described with such violence that the ship itself threatened to break up. It's as if the wood and pitch of the vessel are groaning in protest, possessing more spiritual awareness than the sleeping prophet in the hold. This brings us to one of the most brilliant and ironic contrasts in the entire story: the juxtaposition of Jonah and the pagan sailors. These sailors are rough, sea-hardened men from various nations, worshiping various gods. When the storm hits, panic ensues. They are terrified. They cry out, each to his own deity, throwing their precious cargo overboard in a desperate attempt to lighten the ship and buy themselves a few more minutes of life. They are frantic, active, and deeply spiritual in their own way, seeking any supernatural aid they can find. Meanwhile, the only man on board who supposedly knows the creator of the sea and the dry land is fast asleep in the dark. The captain finds him and shakes him awake, screaming, "How can you sleep? Get up and call on your God. Maybe he will take notice of us, so that we will not perish." The irony is thick enough to cut with a knife. The pagan sea captain has to remind the prophet of God to pray. The world is falling apart. Innocent people are about to die because of Jonah's rebellion, and Jonah has to be dragged out of his self-absorbed stupor by a man who doesn't even know his name. When they cast lots to find out whose fault this supernatural storm is, the lot predictably falls on Jonah. They interrogate him. "Who are you? What is your country? What is your people?" Jonah's answer is a masterclass in religious hypocrisy. He stands up on the heaving deck, surrounded by terrified men holding on to the rigging for dear life, and says, "I am a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." It is a beautiful, perfectly orthodox theological statement. It is also a complete lie in practice. He claims to fear the God who made the sea, while actively trying to sail across that very sea to escape him. His theology is sound, but his heart is a million miles away. When the sailors realize that Jonah is running from this supreme God, they are more terrified than before. "What should we do to you to make the sea calm down?" they ask. Jonah's response is tragic. "Pick me up and throw me into the sea," he says. "Then the sea will become calm for you. I know that it is my fault that this great storm has come upon you." For years, I read this as a moment of noble self-sacrifice. I thought Jonah was finally doing the right thing, offering his life to save the crew. But looking closer at the psychology of the man who hates Nineveh, another interpretation emerges, one that is far more chilling. Jonah is not being a martyr. He is choosing suicide over submission. He knows that if he lives, God will likely force him to go to Nineveh. He would rather drown in the freezing, violent depths of the Mediterranean than see his enemies forgiven. His hatred is stronger than his will to live. And here is the most heartbreakingly beautiful part of this chapter. The pagan sailors refuse to do it. These men, who owe Jonah absolutely nothing, who are losing their ship and their cargo because of his stubbornness, try to save him. They grab their oars and row frantically, trying to dig into the waves and force the ship back to land. They value human life more than the so-called man of God does. Only when the sea grows entirely unmanageable, when they are at the absolute brink of capsizing, do they finally, reluctantly, pray to Jonah's God for forgiveness and heave the prophet into the raging water. The moment his body hits the surface, the sea falls dead calm. The sailors, awestruck by the sudden, deafening silence of the ocean, drop to their knees, offer sacrifices, and make vows to Yahweh. The pagan sailors are saved and converted. Jonah's mission is surprisingly successful, just not in the way he intended, and entirely in spite of himself. Meanwhile, the prophet sinks into the dark. As the chaotic surface of the Mediterranean fades above him, Jonah descends into the crushing, silent abyss. The text in chapter 2, written as a poetic prayer, gives us a visceral sense of this drowning. He talks about the currents swirling about him, all the breakers and waves sweeping over him. He sinks to the very roots of the mountains. He feels the seaweed wrapping around his head. It is a terrifying depiction of absolute hopelessness. He has hit rock bottom, literally and metaphorically. The bars of the earth are closing in on him forever. It is here, at the threshold of death, that the famous fish finally makes its brief appearance. Now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah. Notice the phrasing. The fish is not a monster sent to punish a disobedient prophet. The sea was the punishment. The sea was the consequence of his choices. The fish is salvation. It is a bizarre, deeply uncomfortable and dark incubator of grace. God sends this creature to scoop up the drowning man, providing a fleshy, acid-soaked lifeboat when all other hope is lost. It is a severe mercy. Sometimes the rescue doesn't look like a luxury cruise liner. Sometimes it looks like being swallowed by the dark, isolating consequences of our own actions, where we are forced to sit in the stillness and face ourselves. Inside the belly of the fish, Jonah has 3 days and 3 nights to think. And he prays. The prayer recorded in the text is a fascinating piece of literature. It is composed almost entirely of snippets from the Psalms. Jonah is a good religious man. Even in the belly of a sea creature, he knows the right liturgy. He knows the right words to say. He cries out in his distress. He acknowledges that God has cast him into the deep, and he promises to look again toward the holy temple. But as I read this prayer closely, a strange realization dawns on me. It is a prayer of thanksgiving for being saved from drowning. Yes, but it contains absolutely no confession of sin. Jonah never says, "I was wrong to run." He never says, "I'm sorry for my hatred of the Ninevites." In fact, right in the middle of this prayer for deliverance, he manages to slip in a little jab at other people. Those who cling to worthless idols turn away from God's love for them. But I, with shouts of grateful praise, will sacrifice to you. Even in the digestive tract of a giant fish, Jonah remains remarkably self-righteous. He is still dividing the world into us, the good people who worship the true God, and them, the idolaters. He has hit rock bottom, but his core theology of exclusion hasn't fully shattered yet. He is willing to accept God's grace for himself. He is thrilled that God saved him from drowning. But he is not yet ready to extend that same grace to others. Yet God accepts this flawed, half-baked prayer. God does not demand absolute theological perfection before he rescues us. He meets Jonah in his mess, in his stubbornness, in his incomplete repentance. The Lord speaks to the fish, and it vomits Jonah out onto dry land. It's a messy, undignified rebirth. He is given a second chance, not because he has fundamentally changed his mind about Nineveh, but because God is relentlessly persistent. The prophet is back on the beach, covered in gastric juices, smelling of seaweed and fish, and the command comes a second time, exactly as it did the first. Get up and go to the great city of Nineveh. So Jonah goes. He has learned the hard way that you cannot outrun the Almighty. So he begrudgingly points his feet east and begins the long trek to the heart of the Assyrian Empire. The text describes Nineveh as an exceedingly great city, taking 3 days to walk across. You can imagine the scene. Jonah, a solitary, foreign figure, perhaps still bearing the physical toll of his ordeal at sea, walking through the massive gates of the ancient metropolis. The city is bustling with commerce, military parades, and the intimidating architecture of an empire built on conquest. Jonah walks for 1 day into the city, finds a spot, clears his throat, and delivers what has to be the most pathetic, uninspired sermon in the history of prophetic literature. In the original Hebrew, his message is exactly 5 words long. Yet 40 days, and Nineveh shall be overthrown. That's it. There is no introduction. There is no context. He doesn't say who sent him. He doesn't mention the God of Israel. He doesn't explain what the Ninevites did wrong. And, most importantly, he offers absolutely no call to repentance. He doesn't say, "Turn from your evil ways and you might be saved." He just walks into town, drops a 5-word bomb of absolute doom, and presumably prepares to leave. It is the bare minimum. It is malicious compliance. Jonah is doing exactly what he was told. He is calling out against the city, but he is doing it in a way that is designed to fail. He wants them to ignore him. He wants them to mock him or kill him, so that God's wrath will finally fall upon them. He is a postman delivering a ticking time bomb, hoping the recipients don't figure out how to defuse it. But then, the unthinkable happens. The greatest miracle in the Book of Jonah is not the fish. It is what happens next. The text says simply, "The Ninevites believed God." The response is instantaneous and explosive. It starts with the common people. A fast is proclaimed. People begin tearing their clothes and putting on sackcloth, the ancient fabric of mourning and deep distress. The shockwave of repentance ripples through the streets, moving upward until it reaches the highest echelons of power. It reaches the king of Assyria. This ruthless monarch, the ruler of the most terrifying empire on earth, a man whose predecessors bragged about skinning kings alive, steps down from his throne. He takes off his royal robes, covers himself in sackcloth, and sits in the dust. He issues a city-wide decree that is staggering in its desperation. Let neither man nor beast, herd nor flock, taste anything. Let them not feed or drink water, but let man and beast be covered with sackcloth, and let them call out mightily to God. Let everyone turn from his evil way and from the violence that is in his hands. It is a scene of profound absurdity and beauty. The king of Assyria is so desperate for mercy that he orders the cows and the sheep to wear sackcloth and fast. It is a total societal breakdown of pride. They have no guarantee of salvation. The king himself says, "Who knows? God may turn and relent and turn from his fierce anger so that we may not perish." They are clinging to a maybe, grasping at a thread of hope that the prophet deliberately tried to hide from them. And God sees them. He sees that they turned from their violent ways. He sees the genuine brokenness of a wicked empire. And because he is the God that he is, he relents. He decides not to bring the disaster he had threatened. The city is saved. The greatest revival in history has just occurred, sparked by the worst sermon ever preached. The mission is a phenomenal, unprecedented success. You would expect the story to end here with a joyful celebration. You would expect the prophet to fall to his knees in awe of God's power to change the hardest of hearts. But Jonah is not most prophets. And this is not a fairy tale. We have arrived at chapter 4, the climax of the story, and the part that most children's books conveniently omit. Nineveh is saved, the people are rejoicing, the disaster has been averted, and Jonah is absolutely furious. The Hebrew text literally translates to, "It was evil to Jonah, a great evil, and it burned him up." He is not just annoyed, he is incandescent with rage. He has a total psychological breakdown right there in the city. He prays to God, and this time, there is no polite liturgy, no poetic quotes from the Psalms like he used in the fish. This is raw, unfiltered, screaming honesty. "O Lord, is not this what I said when I was yet in my country? That is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish." Here, finally, the truth comes out. Jonah drops the mask. He confesses his true motivation for running. He didn't run because he was scared. He ran because he knew this exact thing would happen. And then, Jonah does something incredibly audacious. He takes one of the most sacred, foundational descriptions of God's character in the entire Hebrew Bible. A creed found in Exodus 34 that the Israelites recited constantly to remind themselves of God's goodness, and he weaponizes it. He throws God's own resume in his face as an insult. He sneers, for I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and relenting from disaster." Think about the weight of that sentence. Jonah is saying, I knew you were going to be loving. I knew you were going to be kind. I knew you couldn't bring yourself to destroy them. You are a soft, sentimental, overly forgiving God, and I despise it. Jonah's ultimate problem with God is that God is too good. Jonah's sense of justice has been profoundly violated. To Jonah, grace is an injustice. How can God just forgive the Assyrians? What about the blood on their hands? What about the Israelites they tortured? What about the scales of justice? Jonah's anger is the cry of a victim who sees his abuser get a pardon instead of a prison sentence. Underneath his prophetic robes, he is a deeply wounded man who believes that for the universe to be fair, Nineveh must burn. The paradox of Jonah is that he loves God's mercy when it applies to himself. When he was drowning in the ocean, a rebel who deserved to die, he gladly accepted the severe mercy of the fish. He praised God for saving his life. But when that exact same mercy is applied to his enemies, he finds it grotesque. He wants a God who grades on a curve, a God who extends grace to us and pours out wrath on them. His despair is so absolute that he begs God to kill him. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live. He is throwing a cosmic temper tantrum. If God is going to forgive Nineveh, Jonah does not want to live in that kind of universe. God's response to this furious, suicidal outburst is remarkably gentle. He doesn't strike Jonah with lightning. He doesn't yell at him. He simply asks a probing, quiet question. Do you do well to be angry? Is it right for you to be this mad, Jonah? God is holding up a mirror to the prophet's soul, inviting him to examine the dark, rotting roots of his own hatred. God is asking Jonah to step outside of his nationalistic tribalism and look at the world through the eyes of the Creator. But Jonah doesn't answer. He turns his back, walks out of the city, and goes to find a hill where he can sit and watch, secretly hoping that God will change his mind and burn the city down anyway. So we find our prophet sitting on a hill east of the city, baking in the relentless Middle Eastern sun. He builds a small, flimsy shelter, a booth, and sits under it in the shade, arms crossed, pouting. He is waiting for the fire and brimstone that he desperately hopes is still coming. He is holding a grudge against God's grace. Here, God decides to give Jonah one final, hands-on object lesson. The Lord appoints a plant, a leafy, fast-growing vine, often translated as a gourd or a kikayon, to grow up over Jonah's booth. It provides thick, cool shade, relieving the prophet from his miserable discomfort. The text tells us that Jonah was exceedingly glad because of the plant. It is the first and only time in the entire book that Jonah is happy. He is not happy about the salvation of 120,000 people. He is happy because he got some personal comfort. His emotional world is entirely wrapped up in himself. But the lesson doesn't end there. The next morning at dawn, God appoints a worm. The worm attacks the plant, and the plant withers and dies. Then, as the sun rises, God appoints a scorching east wind, the dreaded Sirocco, a hot, suffocating wind from the desert that feels like a blast furnace. The sun beats down on Jonah's unprotected head. He is miserable, dehydrated, and physically agonizing. Once again, his reaction is explosive. His brief moment of joy evaporates, and his suicidal rage returns. He faints from the heat and begs to die, saying again, "It is better for me to die than to live." God comes to him a second time and asks the exact same question, but this time with a specific focus. Do you do well to be angry for the plant? Jonah, completely unhinged and doubling down on his self-pity, snaps back, "Yes, I do well to be angry, angry enough to die." He feels completely justified in his outrage over the death of a weed. And then, God delivers the final devastating and beautiful monologue of the book. It is a masterful exposure of Jonah's misplaced priorities. "You pity the plant," God says. "You pity the plant for which you did not labor, nor did you make it grow, which came into being in a night and perished in a night. And should not I pity Nineveh, that great city, in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left, and also much cattle?" God is exposing the sheer absurdity of Jonah's heart. Jonah has profound, tearful empathy for a piece of vegetation that provided him with a few hours of personal comfort. Yet, he has absolutely zero empathy for a sprawling metropolis filled with tens of thousands of lost, confused human beings. People so morally and spiritually blind, they do not know their right hand from their left. God even throws in the animals at the end, and also much cattle, as if to say, "Jonah, if you won't care about the people, can't you at least care about the innocent animals? You cared about a weed." God is telling Jonah, "You didn't make that plant. It meant nothing to you until it served you. But I made those people. I formed them. They are my creation, however broken and violent they have become. How can I not look upon them with pity when they cry out to me?" And then, the story just stops. There is no response from Jonah. There is no neat resolution where he falls to his knees, cries tears of repentance, and hugs a Ninevite. The book ends abruptly on God's haunting, unanswered question. Should I not pity them? When I first realized this, the cliffhanger frustrated me. But as I've lived with this story, I've come to understand that the ending is entirely intentional. It doesn't matter what Jonah's answer was. The question is not meant for him anymore. The author leaves the story open, hanging in the air, because the question is meant for you, and it is meant for me. The story of Jonah leaves us sitting in the blinding heat of our own prejudices, staring at the cities we despise, the people we have written off, the political enemies we demonize, and the individuals who have hurt us deeply. It corners us and forces us to reckon with the scandalous, boundary-breaking nature of divine grace. It asks us, in the quietest, most piercing voice, do you want a God who only loves the people you love? Or are you willing to trust a God whose mercy is wilder, deeper, and far more radical than your own? In the end, it was never about the fish. It was always about the heart.